Welcome to the weekly update. This live on November 19th. Hi, Sarah. um, it's a big day. It feels weighty, and maybe it's the astrology, maybe it's the season. But I'm currently sitting here with already too many notes to get through in order to make this a 30-minute live. So before even starting, I was sitting with myself thinking, like, this isn't going to be 30 minutes. And the reason why is because I have too much, always too much. So usually when I'm sitting to start something like this, I have like a couple of points that I think I might cover or get to, but the rest of it is just kind of impromptu, extemporaneous stream of consciousness sharing, which is always interesting since I'm just here. So if anybody else wants to join the chat and put in some questions along the way, I welcome it to make it seem like I'm talking less to myself. But no, there's so much to cover here. Check this out. A page full of bullet point things. So as usual, let me do a quick overview. The point of these live weekly updates is just to give some kind of outlet for a summary, a share out of the things that have happened in the past 7 days. If you notice, a lot happens in 7 days, and there's too much to cover. Like last week, we had the conversation with Nick Holland, and that went lovely for nearly an hour and a half. So I didn't even get to talk about exactly the stuff that had happened that week. So maybe I'm feeling extra compressed because there's just like 2 weeks of buildup now. But if I'm being honest, that's just how my life is. 1 week, 2 week, it doesn't matter. It's too full. So before even getting into this, I was thinking like maybe I should explain a little bit of like what I'm trying to do here, where the live video update even came from. And it does relay a little bit, I guess, into the topical themes that have come up this week, specifically around failure and trusting the process, and just in general, a notion of like the experimentation that is consistent through most of my work. Um, Let me just tell you, here are the things that I wanted to talk about from the past week, and then I'll get back into that point of view. The first thing is that last Friday, I did a workshop presentation for a group of women leaders that was titled The Responsibility of Radical Self-Acceptance. This was the first page of the packet that I created. And the responsibility of radical self-acceptance is an important topic. It's something that's really been just like prominent for me for the past several years, and certainly in informing my own work and personal process. But I was really harping on the issue of responsibility to make it more than just like a self-development kind of exercise. So that's one theme from the week, the responsibility of radical self-acceptance. The second theme from the week came up in Friday evening's session, the event, the show, the experience that we call For the Love of Strangers. And this was the penultimate experience of For the Love of Strangers. It's been going on every month this year since February. The topic, though, for this particular experience was on failure. And I want to wrap into the discussion of failure, or the share out of failure, because it was a very interesting it was a good experience. It was an interesting experience. The audience was rowdy, and it's left me thinking a lot of things. I know I've heard from other people who are there on Friday that they've also been thinking about the topic of failure and how we frame failure. So it's just kind of been coming up in a lot of other conversations since. The third major theme from the week, and I'm only hitting the highlights here, is about trusting the process. This is the topic that came up last Sunday in Liberation is Local. The page for trusting the process is in the chat of my Substack, Want to Know. And that has been relevant again for my own personal process, but I think it's like kind of related to all of this stuff: responsibility, failure, trusting the process. These things are very like coherently aligned with each other. So then another final thing that isn't on a page that is coming up this week is that I'm trying to do a project. I'm like in conversation with someone about how to lead in these times. It's a little bit more in the behind the scenes aspect of my work from the consulting point of view of the work that I do. But it's had me really thinking about how to support people who really want to make meaningful change and are kind of in this leadership position that to me mirrors what happened in the diversity, equity, inclusion bubble, as I like to call it, before that popped. And now we're in this space of like how to lead while the conditions around us are getting even more repressive and people are concerned about the language that they can use and everything else. But honestly, it is kind of like the same as it ever was. The issues that are emerging are, I think, very similar to the issues that were present when everybody was trying to do diversity, equity, inclusion with like so much visibility and enthusiasm publicly. And that really comes down to matters of like culture and capacity and relationships. So I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. I'm returning to some ideas that I've had around working relationships. I did a little like teaser where I called it like maybe romancing the revolution. That's another thread that's kind of coming up. And it's all just about like how do we be the people that we need? Kind of the new frame of how I've been sort of positioning all of my work, like learning how to be who we need. So, okay, just to recap, we're not even getting into the details. Major themes and topics from just the past 7 days involve the responsibility of radical self awareness or radical self acceptance, and awareness too. Topics of failure from For the Love of Strangers, trusting the process from Liberation is Local, considering working relationships and building the cultures and the capacities for us to be who we need in order to keep moving through all this time and place. And then where I started here, I was like, what am I doing here with these live videos, weekly updates? I'm going to go to that spot right now because maybe you're wondering what's the point of all of this. Sometimes I wonder that too, beyond just the fact that like I feel like I need to share more of what I'm up to. For the past several years, I've been rather quiet in sharing out the work that I'm doing and what it means. But in this particular moment, am feeling like quite frustrated with even this because I am still holding too much. It's not release enough. I want to say more, share more, give more. There's depth to literally everything that I even just said, plus more. And so I found myself feeling quite limited anyway, even with this like arbitrary pseudo expectation that this will be like a 30-minute update, kind of like hitting the high notes. That already by design, a summary hitting the high notes is like too superficial for the way that I like to engage. And it certainly is not an accurate representation of the kind of work that I'm doing or the content that I would rather be sharing. So my own frustrations with this, like, what even is a live weekly update good for, are kind of catching me right now because I just want to be able to go further, dig deeper, and share more thoroughly. And I'm feeling the confines of that, which maybe are my own limitations, which is why I said, like, maybe we won't do 30 minutes today. So if I can give myself permission to just let it rock and see what comes up, then maybe some stream of consciousness will flow and we'll see what's happening. But I'm going to offer kind of a spoiler of what I know right now that has reemerged in just the past week as being very relevant for me. Personally, what I'm up to here, what I think I'm up to here is really trying to live into the presence of my own philosophical work and share the process of always being in it, um, to the best of my ability. Now, I've turned to video because over the years, I have spent way more time talking with my voice and speaking, connecting verbally and vocally, than I have actually sitting and typing out words as like a blog post, which I used to do more regularly. I still love writing when I get into it, but I rarely get into it. I think that's just like how I'm stationed right now, that it's harder for me to sit and write. So I tried to give myself the conditions where I could speak more freely and hopefully something would come of that. Now, the background operation is a little bit strategic of like, in terms of content creation. Substack allows for transcripts. Maybe the transcripts could become written text that then can be reposted or republished, and people turn out the machine of how to do content creation. I'm not oblivious to that. I just don't do it super efficiently, effectively, or diligently because I don't really care to right now. Um, but I'm curious about it. So there's kind of the practical aspect of a strategy of trying to make content in a way that flows more easily, so words, and creating the possibility that I could utilize that in a way that's more productive for the platforms where content can be shared, ultimately reaching hopefully my goal of wanting to share the work that I'm up to. But um, there's another layer to this, and this is something I've been very much reminded of recently, which kind of touched me a little bit. In the act of doing a live weekly update, a video gets published, regardless of whatever happens to the transcript, if this gets republished as a blog or not. What I really appreciate about doing something like this is that it is a process for documenting, what's going on. That may seem frivolous. It might seem mundane. It might even seem like so ubiquitous that it's like not everything that happens every week is so special that it really needs to be broadcast out to the public or even documented for the annals of my work, just taking up space on the internet. However, in the past several years, I've returned back to my blog posts that I've written, like the ones I was doing in 2010 and throughout grad school. And I've just been so amazed to be able to read what I wrote. It's kind of like the romantic element of like finding a note slipped in a book that you got at like a thrift store or something. Like when you see that handwritten, personalized note, it just makes it feel something more special. It grounds you in the fact that like something happened here before, or this was a material experience that mattered in someone's life years before, even if we're not really conscious of like that presence now. So there's that kind of like interconnectedness, the making more visible how things continue to ripple throughout into the present, even if it's like long in the past or seemingly insignificant. But I also feel like there's something important to say, maybe those things aren't so frivolous. And what has really captured my wonder lately is to see that when I was like, in my mid 20s, writing blog posts about graduate school or papers and the things that I was frustrated with, or the relationships that were like unraveling around me, or falling in love again, whatever it might be, the things that I was learning, those are all tiny little windows back into something that I thought and I felt that was real in my life. And what is really beautiful about that is being able to see the connection now, 10 or 15, almost 20 years later. I think that in this time, maybe I'm just going to like riff right now and get a little too like philosophical, but I can't deny how meaningful it's been for me to find pieces of myself again from the past. And especially when the work that I was doing, blog posts, YouTube videos, decades ago, were not polished. That if anything, it was more like a free write. These were not essays. I wasn't trying to like sound smart. I was more just giving myself, again, the outlet to say something. But when I look back or I read those things now, I can see these little bits that are just so wonderful. It's like, I can't help but feel a little bit of affection for the person that I was, or the process or the experience that I was having then, and really respect and admire the fact that I took the time to acknowledge it and in a way preserve it, but totally without even thinking. Like I can tell you that when I was writing those in 2010 or being my mid 20 self, I was not anticipating that me now would read that sometime. Just wasn't even in my consciousness. So there's this element of surprise of like the not knowing what the future is going to hold, or even what our future selves might find when we look back. And this is just one individual personal story. Now, of course, it's significant when we think about the fact that there are many other people in the world, and we can find bits of each other from the past in the present, and maybe even intentionally be trying to create something for the future selves, whether that's ourselves or others. There's something important here, and I don't know, maybe I'm not articulating it super well, but I think that there's just this energy or an element of whatever train of thought I'm on right now that I'm kind of carrying into this particular moment with this live because, it's like, it's just a Wednesday. It's just a Wednesday in the middle of another week. And maybe nothing particularly significant or substantial has happened. But actually, honestly, if I'm really being sincere, I know that what's happened this week is significant and substantial. Of course it is. And this is actually going to connect into much more of the 3 or 4 or 5 main topics that I said were coming up for this week. So, this is loose. This is so loose. Again, I'm not trying to deliver a well-packaged idea here. But if you're following the looseness of this, I think that one other reason why I'm happy that I have suddenly fallen into doing these weekly lives is because I know that there's a thread here that is meaningful. And it maybe doesn't seem so substantial or so important right now, but if I look back in the past, that gives me an indication that that was significant. This is similar. So maybe there's something else here. Now, the cheat code to understanding what I'm getting at here, if you're really struggling to follow, which I don't blame you, but if you are struggling to follow, um, then let me just offer this. I keep saying that what I'm doing is trying to live out my projects as a meta philosophical performance artist. I know it doesn't make sense. Those are complicated words, but it's the doing of the thing in the way of talking about it. So if I'm actually being present for my project, then I should be doing the work that I am trying to clarify and share. Most of the work that I'm trying to clarify and share might be confusing for people, or that might still be an open question that feels a little too vague. But the more that I talk to people, especially as people just kind of like see the outcroppings, like the concrete bits of what I'm doing for the love of strangers, liberation is local, a workshop, or maybe even this, such alive. People might see these things and kind of get a sense for it, but let me just say, I know it's all pertinent, it's all related, it's all present. And that's just because I've somehow like hacked my life into doing this thing. So no matter what, I've created this lovely little like airtight self-referential cycle where whatever I'm doing, I think that it is appropriate because I'm fit it into the larger framework of being a meta-philosophical performance artist and the philosophy that I'm trying to convey and practice, do and be and become at the same time is all so integrated that it's kind of like, yeah, you lived your day on a Wednesday. And I'll be like, sweet, job well done. It's all part of it. Okay, so now that might be loose. Take what you want from that as like a life hack for how to give yourself a meaningful life and pursue meaningful projects. But I might be rambling. Is this making any sense? Let me just ground it and I'll talk about some of the pillars of the week so that maybe the connections will start to like form for yourself. Let's begin with the responsibility of radical self acceptance. I'm not going to get so deep into this. Um, as deeply as I would like to. Again, this could be like a whole week's worth of just like consistent conversation. So, summary points, surface level engagement is going to have to do. But the responsibility of radical self acceptance is something that I've really been thinking about so much, especially because if we just start with the fact that there's this practice of radical self acceptance, that alone can feel challenging for people. Of course, I'm getting the language of radical self-acceptance from Chani Nicholas's work because I follow her and I think she's a phenomenal cultural influence and creator and astrologer. But her book, You Were Born for This, is kind of the introduction for radical self-acceptance, and that was how I came into like that language. But her work through the astrology and the support and resources that she provides have actually deeply shaped my own ability to radically self-accept myself. Um, but in the context of like a larger picture of life and the world and culture and society and community and family and relationships and like what are we all doing here? I think there's something so important and powerful about us getting to a place where we can really exercise radical self acceptance because that means that we get to be exactly who we are and do precisely the thing that only we can do. I get immediately nervous as soon as we start talking about this because it sounds like individualism. It sounds like as long as you accept just who you are, then you're golden. And yes, it's true that a lot of times there are pieces of ourselves that are hard to accept. That involves like a comprehensive view of ourselves, like including our strengths and our weaknesses, including our light and our shadow. And some people maybe struggle with like being a whole human in front of themselves, even, let alone other people. But if we actually are practicing radical self acceptance, then ideally, I guess, the hope is that we come to a place of being able to tap into some kind of like compassion, empathy, and acceptance for others too. We don't have to be a certain thing other than what we are in order to be able to, be okay and then relate on that level. Again, I think this is important for us to do for ourselves first and foremost, in order to kind of be able to then express this acceptance of others. I don't particularly love the common phrasing of like, in order to really love someone else, you have to love yourself first. I don't think that's exactly true. I think we can grow and learn in relationship as well, whether that's how to love or how to be loved, how to accept ourselves or how to accept others. But just let that be like a punctuation of the fact that I don't think that radical self acceptance is necessarily or inherently a project of individualism. In fact, I would argue we could go further and say the the very importance of radical self acceptance is precisely so that we do not get trapped in a kind of solipsistic, isolated individualism. But I'm not going to argue that. I think take it or leave it. That's where I stand. We have to push it further though, because once we get to this point of being able to like radically accept who we are and know as much of ourselves and what that means, good, the bad, the light, the dark, the ugly, the beautiful, the complicated, the messy, the simple, the pure, whatever you want to call it. I don't even like most of those words. There's a responsibility a part of this. And that was really the emphasis that I was trying to deliver in this workshop, because I think that in terms of what personal development, self-help, all this kind of like market, the economies that have been built of trying to help people develop into their best selves, the whole industry of self-help or personal development, I think, is generally kind of mostly gross. And what a brilliant model, because you can always tap into people's like feelings of insignificance or inefficiencies or somehow being like not enoughness. And then you now have like a renewable source for marketing and tapping into more content to like get people to buy your shit. Well, of course, we're going to have a critique of capitalism. Why not? So again, the point is that responsibility needs to be overlaid on any kind of discussions about radical self-acceptance, mostly so that we don't fall into individualism, but also so that we understand why it's so important to accept yourself. This isn't just so that you can finally feel like at peace and content with who you are, but more so that you can know with greater confidence and clarity and alignment who you are and what is your thing to do for the collective. So the responsibility piece, it's the language, I think that resonates is like, it is your responsibility to know who you are and do that. Nobody else really should tell you or have to tell you what that is. We could debate that. I don't know. There's probably a cultural paradigm coming in through here. But it's our responsibility to become who we are. And then it is also our responsibility to be ourselves the best and the fullest that we can be, if that is really in the service of others. So everything that I was doing was like, again, emphasizing and reiterating as much as I can of like why it's so important. If you do your work, it should be in support of shared goals, collective visions, and like helping serve other people too. When we do this together, now we're talking like power. Now we're talking transformation. Because imagine if there's a community, we can even do it on a small scale. When people know their role and they commit to doing what they can do so fully, so well, together, that's how you establish like teams of excellence. That's how you create collaborations that churn out innovation and problem solving and creative solutions and like just brand new things that really could be supporting life and sustainable like living in the long haul for in ways that like we just can't even fathom right now. So that's the kind of tapping into creative potential, power, and innovation for life that I think is what's really at stake here and why it's so important for us to pursue this with a notion of responsibility and to do it responsibly. Again, not just to like become an all-star person who like suddenly has fame and wealth because you know who you are better than other people know themselves. So the responsibility of radical self-acceptance, I don't know. Is there more that I want to do here? Maybe. There's like pages. This content is so so full and rich. We could talk forever about it. I think about it all the time. But I mean, maybe this is where we hit the wall, the limitation of a weekly live update. I don't think I can get into it right now and do this. It just doesn't feel appropriate. So I'm going to move on. I feel a little sad about that. But I'm going to move on without doing more here. I'm sure that the themes of the responsibility of radical self acceptance will continue to emerge week after week because guess what? They do. That's what I'm up to. So there will be more of that at some point, I'm sure. Okay. So then let's get into talking about failure. I want to say a little bit about failure. And actually, maybe I will do a little segue. Here's something that I noticed from my talk on Friday with the group. I gave these pages out, and it was interesting. Not everybody loved it. Some people did, for sure. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of big nods. The nonverbal cues in the room were affirming. But there were also people who very much struggled with probably the content, but they were more vocal about how much they struggled with my pages. They were like, ugh, my engineering brain cannot make sense of this. It's so hard to follow. And I get that feedback a lot. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but this is how I make sense of things because it is all connected. Everything's related. And I want to be able to kind of bounce back and forth between the things. I'm literally doing it right now. I can't talk about the fullness of even the pages and the content that I shared last Friday for that group because it's too connected to all these other things. So welcome to my brain. I'm doing the best I can. And if that's not how you think, I don't know. I'm accepting myself. Accept me too. Okay. But this does connect specifically into the next thing on For the Love of Strangers with the topic of failure. Because I could think, wow, even something so simple as like the way that I present my pages could be deemed a failure for some people because it just doesn't work for the way that they process material and content. And shouldn't I be serving everybody so that everybody can have access to this? I don't know. Maybe people would think that my presentation on Friday was a failure because they just couldn't connect with it, like intellectually, mentally. Brains are not aligned here. I don't know. And I'm not going to harp too much about it or really stress because one of the things that was so great about talking about failure and For the Love of Strangers is I really want to offer a way to think about failure in a way that's not so like terrifying, that's not so awful. I really think there's a cultural component here of like, especially maybe it's US American. I'm not even sure exactly if it's limited to that, but like I already knew and anticipated that people would want to save the notions of failure and be like, no, 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 it's not a failure. It's a lesson. You really learned something or you're just trying something. And I get it. I get it. It's true. It's like very much the scientific method is at play here that if we try something and it doesn't work, then we've learned it and we can try again. And then we'll hone it and we'll figure it out. And we'll land where we wanted to be. And you hear the like happy ending there. We still want to inject the possibility or at least the conclusion of getting to the happy ending or put a silver lining on something. And I don't know that that's always the case or that it's always necessary. Because sometimes failure is not a bad thing. So anyway, I really appreciated the conversation and the energy of the group when we were talking about failure. I told many stories to try to get people in the mental space of thinking about failure. And I want to share a little bit of an interesting thing that came up since then, because I was talking to somebody who was at For the Love of Strangers, and they expressed to me surprise when I was describing what I'm actually up to with For the Love of Strangers. So let me, like, maybe we'll go a little deeper here. We're not going to talk about failure so much as I want to share, again, the process and like what is going on here with processing the process or sharing it along the way. So For the Love of Strangers is a very unique container. Over the past 10 months, the finale next month will be the 11th. So we'll just say for like a year of trying to create and practice making this space for community to connect, I've used language like this as an experiment, an effort to try to build a local culture of connection. It's local because it's involving people who are in person in a shared geographical space. I'm trying to bring people together to be able to meet one another. There is a certain element of attracting people who are like, for the love of strangers, and then the description is so vague that people who are interested in talking to strangers are more likely to show up than those who are like petrified of the idea. So there's an intention to bring together like-minded, hopefully similarly aligned in terms of their values, people, and then create a space and a container for something to happen, like an experience or a metaphilosophical performance piece that people are actually participating in. To jump to the meta level, yeah, I want people to be meaningfully connecting. It's just something that I like to do. It's a Friday night. Why not do something interesting and get something out of it where it's actually a meaningful connection? I often say that I want people to leave the experience with something to think about, more to talk about, and maybe something to practice. In the meantime, for an hour and a half, you're thinking, you're talking, and inadvertently, whether you realize it or not, hopefully practicing like how to at least meaningfully connect with others. So that's the overall structure of the container For the Love of Strangers, which I'm so thrilled even happened. Like, truly, genuinely thrilled that I've created this space and it has continued on and seems to be very well received for the most part. But then what happened is like the actual experience of the container is also very intentional. So when I was talking to this person about what happened, they were like, "That one was so good. That one really, like, was powerful." And what they're talking about is the process itself of, like, from start to finish. The hour and a half contains very intentional design moves on my part that maybe people aren't super aware of. So this one was relatively easy. I've done it before with other topics. I think the months that went the best were the ones that had this particular format and structure, like, dialed in. Here's the theme: failure. When I'm talking about failure, I already know how people are gonna come in. I said they wanna save me, they wanna save the story, and they don't want failure to be the conclusion. It's gotta be something that is, like, positive with a silver lining on it. That means that I know people are gonna come in with really strong reactions, and I'm trying to buffer against that. So some of the stories that I offer, which are usually, like, I pitch it as, like, my best, worst ideas for meaningfully connecting. These are not terrific ideas. Some of them are kind of bad ideas, but most of them are true and things that I've tried. So I get to share a story of a best worst idea that I have likely performed in my own life, say how that went, and then people get to react and talk about it in their small groups, and then we just kind of facilitate the process, story after story after story. So I am purposefully talked about like the themes that have been coming up from the past couple of weeks about the oak tree and the acorns and like the failures of being so excessive. So not every attempt at something becomes so utterly precious that everything depends on it. That one acorn, for instance, being the seed that really gets planted and grows into a big tree. Sometimes you just got to try 1,000 acorns, and that actually is the method. And if we were to look at the level of acorns, like, wow, it's a lot of failures because a lot of acorns did not turn into trees. We might even say that the tree itself is a failure because it put out so much energy to like very little end if the end goal is to produce another oak tree. Already, we should be paying attention to the fact that like most of our failures are dictated or evaluated based on the ends that we assume, the outcomes that we assume we're approaching. So we could get real, like, I don't know, guru-y here and come in with the sage wisdom that, like, the process is the journey, not the destination. Duh. And in that case, we would never criticize a tree for treeing too much because it didn't create another tree. It just produced its seasonal outputs the way that a tree does. It was treeing very well. Why would we call it a failure? The other failures we could say are that, like, sometimes the successes come from failures inadvertently. So I used the widely extended metaphor now to pull in squirrels. That squirrels are the ones planting all those acorns, and they forget where most of them are, and those are often the ones that become the trees. So, like, tree came out of failure. It's just too much. But you can see that's like a very simple, pretty accessible example that carries on the themes from the past few weeks about the excessive, exuberant attempts at our projects and recognizing that, like, maybe we take the pressure off of having to do the exact right thing perfectly in order for it to produce the outcome we want. Like, if we're all kind of collectively doing this, there's something to gain from all trying and attempting just because the attempt is itself what the purpose is. I don't mean to be too vague, but okay, next story was, I don't know if it's exactly in the order, but I wanted to tell a story of, like, a total failure, like a real bad failure, the one that gets the visceral reactions of, like, the worst possible things that could happen, the things that make people afraid of failure. People are afraid to fail because people might judge me, I might embarrass myself, maybe there'll be, like, a public element and people will see that I'm not successful or I didn't do something well, and then my reputation will be threatened or people will make fun of me. Maybe I'll get bullied. Maybe this will follow me forever. Whatever, like, our fear of failure is really attached to, it's some kind of consequence of the act of failing connected to other people. Likely that's like the shame quality. So I told a story of something that I did in high school that hit all those marks, like really brought up the worst kinds of consequences that no one wants to suffer. Like, we are trying to avoid public shame and humiliation among our peers, especially thousands of high schoolers. Like, please, probably a more vicious audience would be middle schoolers. And guess what? I did it in middle school too. Same thing. So my point there was to say, like, I was like, I want to give you a survival story that sometimes when we fail and the things that we're the most afraid of happening do happen, then what? Look, I live to tell the tale, fortunately. That maybe seems a little bit too flippant, but I think there's something about also confronting the worst things that we are afraid of if we really dig deep and, like, but what are we really afraid of? Are we afraid of failure? Or are we afraid of these other things? And I think that will shape the things that we attempt to try. So I'm not going to go through all the stories of For the Love of Strangers on the topic of failure. But what I am trying to illustrate is that the process itself of moving through For the Love of Strangers, I described the other day to this person as like the Socratic method of affect. So if you're familiar with the Socratic method, Socrates was, renowned for getting people together to talk and about ideas in this kind of dialogic way. The method is to pose the question and then have people engage in answering through their own thinking process. And then they come to what they think is sort of their own conclusion. But the Socratic method is a way of reflective questioning that really guides people to the consequences of the conclusions that Socrates was trying to, like, get people to arrive at all along. But the process is powerful because you're not just telling people what it is, they go through their own journey to arrive there. So, why I really appreciate For the Love of Strangers is that, like, this container is intended to be something like a metaphilosophical performance art piece or project in the works, because I want people to go through their own experience from when we start and then an hour and a half later. There is this kind of, like, movement of the feelings and the reactions and the stories and the experiences that people bring to the groups themselves when they're talking about my stories that I'm sharing. But I want to keep twisting and shifting those reactions to get to a place where, like, maybe we need to keep thinking about this at the very least. Maybe there's more to unpack here. Or maybe I'm thinking about it in a slightly different way because failure is like, maybe it's just more complex, or I don't have to be so, like, rigid about my automatic knee-jerk reactions to the notion of failure. Anyway, it was great. I liked it a lot, and I'm just offering that as maybe, like, a little bit more in depth of an explanation of kind of what For the Love of Strangers was always designed to be, and of course that there are multiple levels at play in the creation of a container like that. Um, what happens after this now is an interesting question. I'm glad you asked. But I've been thinking about For the Love of Strangers and how, like, the conclusion of this is gonna be next month. The finale will be in December. It'll be 11 months total of making this kind of container, experimenting with the process, shaping the content, really trying to play with, like, the format and how it happens. And I have learned so much. It's just been so wonderful when I think back about the year and what I have created. I know that For the Love of Strangers was really the inspiration that gave me, like, the boost to attempt doing something like stand-up philosophy. There's, like, enough of an element there that I was like, maybe I could, like, tweak that one a little bit and lean harder into this area of presenting the philosophy or the philosophical movement of a kind of being in a thinking space with others. So that alone was a beautiful byproduct. But I do think that For Love of Strangers is good on its own right. It's a valuable container, the way that it's been kind of like shaped and designed now. And I will just say that, like, I don't know what happens after this, but I do hope that there is at least either more opportunities to present something like For the Love of Strangers, or to take the insight of the container itself and apply it in other spaces with other groups or other kinds of topics. So, pretty exciting stuff, honestly. And that's why now let's do a little transition into the third pillar from the week, trusting the process with Liberation is Local. When I'm doing Liberation is Local week after week since August, each page is really kind of taking a next step in a continuous thought process that goes from week after week. So I'm doing that on purpose. One, because like it's just easier to do that instead of coming up with random stuff every week, which can feel really disjointed, even if it is somewhere conceptually connected. The other reason is because I want to be able to continuously move through a literal process of thinking with others where, like, one thing does kind of move us into the next. So if you're paying attention, the metaphilosophical performance project for, say, something like Liberation is Local, where the headline is Learn How to Be Who We Need, then the idea behind creating a weekly space for community learning about something like liberation and what it takes to really be practicing liberatory transformation in our concrete everyday lives means that hopefully week after week we are learning something, and that is facilitating our own process of transformation to become more liberated, to be more free, to be able to apply the values of liberation even in these conditions in our lives, because we are literally becoming those people who can do that. So for this week, trust the process. It, I think, is pretty, I don't know, clearly connected to this past several weeks that had happened before. I'm trying to find the other ones. Like, we did the magic seed ones, and then the one the week before was this page of like creating the creative process itself and what happens behind the scenes. So that alone is like a pretty obvious connection of going from what happens behind the scenes in the creative process and the kind of discipline it takes to stay in that space into now follow up with trusting the process. So this page, there's a lot that I really appreciated about being able to talk about this. And again, we're not going to get into it. That would be like a whole other hour at least of kind of unpacking what happened with this page. But I will say that sort of the high level takeaways that mean the most to me is that I think it's bullshit when people say to just trust the process, as if it's like things are going to happen on their own right without our contribution or volition to shape what we're looking for. So I was really trying to offer a critical like point of saying that trusting the process only makes sense if it's done in good faith. And unfortunately, I think there's a real tendency for people to say, like, I'm trusting the process, which is more an expression of like some kind of lazy denial, or, you know, abdicating responsibility for like creating the outcomes that you want to. If we just kind of turn it all over, hand over all of our faith and that something will happen. That's funny because that actually is one of my phrases that I have lived with for a really long time. Um, but if we just say, like, whatever will happen is what's going to happen, then that means that we don't really have the part to play in it. So even something will happen is very different than whatever happens. I don't want to get too confused with like the semantics of it, but the trusting the process is so valuable. It's like, it is one of the most significant things that I think we can do when we're doing it in good faith. If you're really trusting the process, then you have to be a part of the process. You have to be committed to the process. You have to be showing up for it every single moment that you have the opportunity to. And that means that, like, what came through in thinking about how to describe the relationship that we have to the process it actually became like a relationship, which harkens back to the working relationships idea that I was alluding to that came back from several years ago. It's like we need to show up as if we are in true relationship. And then, like, it's the journey, not the destination. It's the relationship itself, not just trying to like say we want to get to this place of we exist in this way together. It's the doing that is the being. It's the actively showing up for inconsistency that makes the transformation possible. That is the work. And so to be in the process, to trust the process, we have to ourselves be trustworthy in the ways that we show up for the process, the relationship, the everyday actions that reflect our commitment to really be those people who do those things and show up in those ways. Um, and so it's kind of like again, to go back to the very beginning now. Wow, are you following all this? It's like a lot. Welcome to the week. But if we're doing it well, then trusting the process is actually a reflection of our ownership of responsibility. So the responsibility of radical self-acceptance is, I hope, the connection you're hearing, the echo. But to trust the process means that we are so responsible for the process that we are engaging in that now we can wholeheartedly trust it without any kind of qualms or doubt, because it literally is the most that we can do. You can't ask for more. And so beyond that, all you can do is trust that the work that you're doing, the way that you're doing it, if you're doing it from a place of liberation, if you're doing it for collective goals, that means not for the sake of individualism, not for the sake of your own radical self-acceptance to feel better about yourself and then be like, peace out, I'm good, I'm content. But if you're really doing the work that we need to be doing in this world that I firmly and wholly believe in, if you are doing it that with the utmost, with the commitment and your best capacity to show up the way that you would show up for like your absolute beloved, then you become the person who is trustworthy. You become the person who is who we need. And you are doing that in a way that we could not question, even if your acorn doesn't fully turn into the oak tree. Like, it is part of the whole spreading of many possibilities and potentials of that prolific oak. So I really could not understate how much I think we have to trust the process. This is like a slant on what I've talked about before of like why I have so much faith. And it's really like I mean, practically I think we have to, but functionally, like in terms of the way that this gets embodied and practiced, I think it's where we land. It's sort of like the highest expression of being able to stay so committed to the work is that then you can trust the process. Then you do have faith because there is an element of truth which is trustworthy, and we can really lean on the effort of this project, the will, the transformation that we are participating in, that we are moving forward ourselves. And like, I don't know what more you can ask for if you're looking for like a meaningful life with purpose than to get to a point where you know that what you are doing is exactly what you can and must and should be doing because it's your work, that's your job, that's your responsibility. And then you do it kind of regardless of in the larger scale or scope of the world, like you do your bit. And that is the most that we can ask for. And the larger context, like the landscape, the scenery of our human existence right now might seem pretty desperate, or it might seem really discouraging. And I'm not saying it's not. It is on many fronts. All the more reason for us to be so committed to do our absolute best, knowing that I'm looking for the problem of inertia page, but that was what was coming up last week in the creative process one here. Knowing that when we're at this stage of the inertia, you're doing your most. That's all we can really, that's not just all we can ask for, that's all we can do. That is the most we can do. So anyway, trusting the process is, I kind of think like a lifesaver when it comes to the existential crisis or the collapse of meaning that we might be facing of like, what's the point of all this? What can I possibly do? I'm hoping that what's starting to like really resonate is that like a lot, actually, we can do a lot. And that is within our power and our control to do if we become the people who will do it. All right. I'm going to stop with the trusting the process now. We're making good progress on these pages. Hopefully you're seeing the ways that some of these are connecting. But uh I guess I'm going to wrap this up. Maybe we'll do it in an hour. Where I started with all this was like, what's the point of these live videos? Um and I I feel like you know, at the level of like a concrete something to hold on to. Now there's a video, it'll go on YouTube. At least there's going to be some tiny moment of like a time capsule that maybe another 10 years or 12 years from now, me or someone else will go back and look at it and be like, oh, wow, Cori was really harping on that radical responsibility or whatever and self acceptance stuff. But I would not be surprised if, should I be so fortunate to live another 12 years and I stumble upon a video like this or one of them, uh, that I will be reminded of the path that I've been doing and then hopefully affirmed in the wisdom of the present moment that sometimes when I'm shaky, I might doubt or feel anxious about. Like, there's something so powerful about retrospect. Like they'll say in hindsight is 2020. I think what we can hope for or maybe strive to do is be in our present with as much of that kind of assurance and confidence that we get from hindsight of kind of knowing what's going on, what was happening there. If we can get to the point of being so present, which is like the presence is just brushing right up against uncertainty and the unknown. But if we can be in the present moment with so much depth of like knowing to the point where we can trust it, then I feel like that has some kind of good, what a word, good relationship to the uncertainty of the future, which we cannot know or predict fully. Um, Now, this is how I want to close. I talked about this experience of like reading my blog posts, and I did share a little bit of this app For the Love of Strangers. I read like a couple paragraphs from this post, but for the sake of just demonstration, performativity, I don't know. I want to read a little bit more from it, and I will say again that like when I revisited this blog post, the blog's gonna like be gone soon. I don't even know if you can find it anymore. The only way that this currently exists is in an archive on my website, currently CoriWong.com. It's under the About page, down at the bottom, where I've built this archive. It's not even a comprehensive archive, but there's a sub menu of writings and like old websites or publications or something, blog posts. And then in that, now there's a sub drop down of finding the archive of my previous iterations of CoriWong.com. This I wanted to preserve because I've been doing this work for so long. It was like very important to me as I was building this new website to have an archive that could hold some of my previous work. What I didn't know is that that archive like transferred some of the copy, but not the formatting. So it looks shitty. It's hard to read and it is like not ideal. But, we preserve what we can and then decipher the rest. So anyway, I found this blog post, and you too can find it if you dig deep into the About page, into the archive, into the blog post where CoriWong.com, use all the iterations of it, and then you search on that for the title of I may be a failure, but at least I'm not bitter. And actually, I think the search bar on my website right now like only indexes the old blog post, so that might be the easiest way to find it. Anyway, images are broken, formatting shit, URLs are like all embedded in a weird way. So it looks terrible, but I'm going to read part of it because when I found this and like reacquainted myself with it last week in preparation for the Love of Strangers, I was reading it and I was so moved that I cried. I like brought myself to tears because I was so moved at what I wrote in 2013. So I'm not going to read all of it, but the gist I'll give to introduce it is that the idea I may be a failure, but at least I'm not bitter is generally pointing to the idea that I went to graduate school, got a dual title PhD, and then didn't go on the job market. I didn't get an academic position, and I'm not in academia. So in terms of how institutions of higher education or the reputation of certain degree granting programs perpetuates itself, that's kind of a failure because you want to turn out scholars who become like, you know, great figures that give credence to the authority or the prominence of the department from which they were trained and contributed to the discipline or the field. So I was grateful to just get through graduate school with the degree and not drop out, which I wanted to do many times. And a lot of people don't make it, like they don't finish their programs. So in some ways that's a success, but the failure is like, but I'm not going to do anything with this degree, presumably. So I was talking about how like the people will ask the question, like whether it's you're graduating from, undergrad or graduate school, usually people will say like, oh, what are you going to do with that degree? And because I was like, I don't know, I'm just happy I made it this far that I got done. I don't know what I'm going to do with a degree. That's what I was kind of referring to. So let's see. I'm just gonna read a little bit, and maybe other helpful context is that like I did my undergrad work at Colorado State in Fort Collins. Went to Pennsylvania for grad school, and then moved back to Fort Collins without a job after that in 2013. As I was defending my dissertation. So let's do a little bit of a reading of this blog post from 2013. I may be a failure, but at least I'm not bitter. We're jumping in right midstream. I'm currently living in this awkward space of being a now late 20-something-year-old with no semblance of a career. Sure, I may get really lucky and that could change sooner rather than later, but let's be honest. For now, on the surface, it looks like I don't have much going for me. Or at the very least, whatever I have going for me is housed in what I've already done. Some might feel better knowing that plenty of other people are in the same graduated with an advanced degree but no direction boat. But for me, that bitter boat is too sad and crowded, and I don't want to have any part of it. I'll get back to this in a minute. For now, let's address something strange about my current situation. I feel like I've already been here. Concerning my relocation, I'm literally back where I was 5 years ago when I graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Same clouds, same sounds, same coffee shops. It feels like I took a very long vacation and awoke from a bizarre Pennsylvania dream. With respect to my degree, I'm hearing the same question that I heard 100 times before. Oh, what are you going to do with a degree in philosophy? But at least then I had an answer. Go to grad school. Duh. Having that answer at the height of the recession, 2008, felt pretty fortunate. I thought it's a 5-year contract with health insurance, they're paying my tuition, and I get to keep studying what I love while being able to teach at the same time. That was a terrific plan for a 21-year-old me, so I was happy to do it. However, over the past year in particular, especially after I made it explicit that I wasn't going on the academic job market, it's been a different experience when people ask, what are you going to do with a doctorate degree in philosophy? For years, my inarticulate answers have been relatively vague at best. I try to temper my anxiety surrounding the question and dance around a suggestion of continuing to do publicly engaged philosophy, teach, and work within local communities, like I always said I wanted to do, mind you. It's only been a few months now that I could add something more definite. I'm moving to Colorado. But even this is a trap. People say, oh, Colorado is beautiful. Did you get a job? And then my awkward kicks in again. Since I didn't move to Colorado because I got a job in Colorado, I moved to Colorado because I wanted to live in Colorado. But of course, you don't need a degree to move to a specific place. So the relentless questioning persists. Yes, but what are you going to do with your degree? So I mean, let me just keep going. Why not? Let's just keep going. Fine, let's address the nature of my degree and what I'm going to do with it. The strange thing is that much like how turning 27 doesn't really feel that different from being 26, I don't anticipate finally having a PhD to drastically change my life. Throughout grad school, I didn't, and still don't really, know what one does with a doctorate degree in philosophy outside of academia because hardly anyone in academia actually supports you in finding other options outside of academia so you don't feel totally alone and hopeless and like you're looking into an empty abyss of a future. So stop asking me, okay? Although I've also come to accept the possibility that many academics don't help find alternative routes for grad students because they honestly, sincerely don't know about them. They are academics after all. But in my experience, the majority of my worry has been spent desperately wondering what could possibly happen next. But the very real and painful risk of realizing that I did just waste 5, but likely more for most people, years of my life is always there, ready to nag at the first moment of pessimistic cynicism, insecurity, or self doubt, to which, just like feeling like a failure, is pretty easy to fall victim. I go on a little bit rant. Like Facebook tells me that many people with whom I graduated high school and college have their own homes, cars, and even their own businesses. While others got busy raising babies, I spent all that time reading, writing, studying, and teaching so that I could eventually put some letters after my name. And what am I doing with that dual doctorate degree? I already told you I'm moving to Colorado. But when others don't see moving to Colorado because you want to as a decently admirable response, working so hard in grad school for all those years does start to sound pretty useless. And here's why. About that bitter boat. If I thought that this degree is just something with which you are to do one particular thing, like get a tenure track job at a university, and I'm not at least now doing that one particular thing, then I would be totally bitter. With such an undefined future and no pending applications for tenure track jobs, my degree obviously isn't doing that one thing for me. So the reasonable conclusion would be this: it was a waste of time, an incredible amount of difficulty and sustained stress for no good reason. Yada yada. This is why so many graduate students are miserable. But fortunately for me, my sanity, and those who have to deal with me on a daily basis, I don't look at my time in grad school like that. Sure, there were plenty of things about graduate school that really sucked. And it broke my heart when one professor told me, "You're in your second year, enjoy the rest of your time in grad school. It's the best time of your life." Because my thought was, I have 3 more years of this and it only gets worse. But for me, a young person with no dependents, there were aspects of grad school that were pretty sweet. Once I accepted the fact that for 5 years I would have to get by on a very meager salary, which actually was quite fortunate to even have that, I made certain decisions for myself about how I was going to spend the next several years living. I love that line. I made certain decisions for myself about how I was going to spend the next several years living, especially once I decided to not kill myself doing all the things one is supposed to do in preparation for the job market. I managed to create time to do lots of other valuable and worthwhile things, like hang out with friends a lot more than I did in college, go dancing on a very regular basis, cook, and work on side projects like my blog and YouTube channel. Coincidentally enough, the very projects that have supported things that I might actually have going for me at the present. And most importantly, in graduate school, I got to do what I wanted to do. I got to continue studying the things that interested me and teaching philosophy how I think it is best taught. So, how did I manage to stay balanced and motivated for those 5 years? And how do I leave a graduate program now without a job nailed down and still feel good about what I've done? By being bullheaded, as some faculty were keen to note, and by doing what I love. As a side note, I want to suggest that this has something to do with the value of integrity, even for one's own well being, but I'll let those connections hang for now. I made sure that throughout grad school, I remained true to the reasons why I started studying philosophy in the first place. And because of all that, my years of study have and will continue to shape and inform what I do from here. That's the cool thing about philosophy, or about doing philosophy in a way that respects the idea of doing philosophy as cultivating a specific way of life, a philosophy, if you will. It can't help but shape you and inform your every action, whether you continue to exist within or outside of the ivory tower of academia. In other words, if you take a good look at me, who I am, and how I live my life, you'll see what I'm doing with my degree. 5 years ago, I didn't fully appreciate the weight that would be put on the degree upon finishing. But whatever peace of mind I have now exists because I can see that I wasn't just getting a philosophy degree. I was doing philosophy in a way that for 5 whole years was cultivating a different sort of philosophical me. And now that I'm in a new place, I'm happy about my geographical location. And in terms of my philosophical activity, I'm still up to many of the same things. I still want and plan to teach. I still want and plan to write. I still want and plan to read. And I still want to live and breathe and enact the practice of philosophy, as I have been over the past 5 years, with passion, with pleasure, and with practical applications that help people live better. At some point, all this might actually lead back to an academic position. But right now, I also have the freedom to find new ways to do all of that, which otherwise might be too restricted, overdetermined, or secondary to other demands if I were going directly into a conventional academic position at this point in my life. So, not getting an academic job right after graduation may look like a failure to some. It may make going to graduate school look like a waste of time to others, and it may even feel like it to many of those who share my position. But I'm not bitter because I never backed out on what I was doing and why I was doing it from the moment I chose to go to graduate school. With those years of grad school, I would still be, or sorry, without those years of grad school, I would still be undergraduate philosophical me. I had a lot of the same philosophical ideas when I was 21, but I didn't have the years I've spent exploring them. My relationship with philosophy then was like a summer fling, and now it's like a committed marriage that has sustained through the ups and downs and plans to push on. So I just loved reading that and finding it again because if I were to actually talk about what I'm doing right now, 12 years after writing that in 2013, it's so much the same. Like, I quit my career for the past 4.5 years now. I've been living in ways that leave space for more things like cooking and writing and spending time with people and talking to people I love on the phone and going on just like great walks. And then I've been able to do more in an unconventional way because I'm not restricted by a job or an institution or an organization with a job itself. Like, so I create things like For the Love of Strangers, or I have the creative freedom and the spaciousness to be able to design something and offer liberation as local. Um, I can spend an hour plus on a Wednesday making a live video, going back to the roots of like my blog and my YouTube videos, just like I said I was doing in graduate school. And the purpose and the project behind all of this has always consistently been doing philosophy in a very certain kind of way, my philosophy. So when I look back to 2013 and like the insight I had after finishing with my degree, what a struggle that was. But I'm so proud of myself for doing it with, like I said, integrity. And I feel like what I maybe was alluding to in that point of saying, I want to suggest that this has something to do with the value of integrity, even for one's own well being, but let's let those connections hang for now. I think what I was getting at there is something very akin to the notion of radical self acceptance, if not the responsibility of radical self acceptance, that we have to be able to do our work and own it and step into it and stay committed to it. And I even love the fact when it came to trusting the process, and I ended the page last week of trusting the process by making allusions to like being in relationship with it. I did not know that in 2013 I concluded this blog post by saying like studying philosophy as an undergrad was like a summer fling. But now that I did graduate school, I feel like I'm in a committed relationship, like a committed marriage to it. And I would say that now it's nearly 20 years of me doing this. Like, this is a long-term relationship. I've been in it. And of course, that has changed me. And I'm the person I am because of it, just like all the other relationships that we have with others. All the more reason why we should be as fully as possible present to ourselves in what we're doing so that we can be as fully as possible present to others in what they're doing, and we do that together. Um, so I started this today, I think, if I remember, I don't even know. But I was like, what the fuck am I doing with these live videos? And that's because right now I'm at a very much a crucial part in my process of wondering like what happens next. For the Love of Strangers is wrapping up. The Gadfly, the stand-up philosophy I'm doing, or the final one I have booked is in just a few days on Sunday. And um, there's always potential to do consulting should people hire me. And actually the out of all of this, like, I'll pause on this thought and end it. I am in a season right now of review because some of these things that I've created are coming to a natural conclusion. And I don't know what happens next. I'm like at that present moment trying to be as close as possible with the uncertainty of the unknown of what happens in the future. I don't know how that unfolds exactly, but I can trust the process. I know I'm showing up as best as I can. And I'm still committed to doing what I can do the way that I believe is like my work to do it. So the thing that I didn't actually say, and I think this is kind of funny, I started this by noting that like there's too many ideas, too much going on with any given week. So even though I did go pretty in depth with this stuff and we're far beyond half an hour for sure, um, one of the things that I didn't share was that throughout this week, from For the Love of Strangers and then into Liberation is Local, I was so struck by the feedback and reflections I got from others in those spaces that what I bring to the experience is a deep sense of vulnerability. And I was struck by it because I don't know. I will say that like it's interesting to me that people see what I'm doing as very vulnerable. There's two prongs here, and this will be how I end this live. I think that my threshold for sharing and being open and public with folks can register for others as very vulnerable. Like that would just go off the charts for other people's scale of what feels vulnerable. For me, it doesn't feel vulnerable to share this stuff. It doesn't feel vulnerable for me to talk about what I've done this week for an hour and 15 minutes. It doesn't even feel vulnerable to get up on a stage in front of community members and talk about like some of the worst failures that led to those egregious consequences that no one really wants to experience themselves. That doesn't feel vulnerable. Coming to Liberation is Local and creating these pages and then sharing like what the way that I think my thought process is naturally evolving week after week, which I assume is sort of resonant with how other people's thought process would be evolving week after week. I'm putting a lot out there because it's truly my thoughts and my feelings, but that doesn't feel vulnerable to me. So I'm thinking a lot about vulnerability. I ended up working on some pages this week, connecting vulnerability, authenticity, and then vulnerability, authenticity, and the experience of intimacy, which to me, I've alluded to it a little bit here and there, even in these lives. It's like literally descriptive or the description of Want to Know, my Substack newsletter. But I think that if you're wondering, what am I up to? What is all this? I've just been appreciating this past week that like all of what I'm trying to do is really in the process of developing the epistemology of intimacy, which is the philosophical project, one of many at this point, that I kind of have churning out in real time. So if you are present for this or curious about what I'm doing or wondering what's operating in the background, just like I kind of gave a little bit of a description of like the design elements of For the Love of Strangers as an experience container, I think that what I can say now is that part of me sharing this on a weekly basis is a little bit of the practice of vulnerability, authenticity, and connection to create some form of intimacy that is really about kind of muscling through and trying to embodiedly flesh out what an epistemology of intimacy really looks and feels like. So it's a philosophical project itself. But I was struck by the feedback about how people receive what I'm doing or perceive what I'm doing as such deep vulnerability. And I will say one day I hope to share a little bit more into the process that I've been pursuing for the past 2 years in therapy very intentionally to be able to do personal work, philosophical work, professional work, and public work in my most local community spaces. 2 years ago, I sought out a new therapist with exactly that question. So, I mean, that's another large chapter in its own right to be able to describe like the intentionality and the process of trying to become a certain kind of person and do the work, trust the process because I'm showing up for it week after week. And now we've like doubled up to do sometimes twice a week because I'm so intense about it. But I will just say that as the year is coming to a close, this year of 2025 of like such wild experimentation and so much creative output, when I'm looking back at what I've done, both philosophically and professionally and personally and in community, then I can see, again, hindsight retrospectively, like, so much good progress has been made. So, we don't try to make our therapists proud, but I feel like I can be proud of myself and the work that I've done because I can actually see the ways that the effort and the discipline and the deep self-work, even radical self-acceptance that I've been trying to more wholly embody myself has actually shown up in all these other elements and spaces of my actual life and my relationships now that indicate to me that, like, the 2 years of hard hard work to try to be the person I want to be has definitely resulted in, like, real tangible, something to show for it. So, okay. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That was a lot for an hour and 15 minutes. I hope that the connections are forming, or you're getting, if nothing else, the sense of them, and you're not sitting like the engineers on Friday who are like, "My brain cannot get this." It's there. I promise it's there. I know it's there. And anybody who wants to sit and follow along with this process that I'm in as part of your process too, I appreciate it so much. Um, know that it's nothing new. And if you're really in it with me for the long haul, which I know that some people are, there are people who have been following my journey and my philosophy and my work in this way for over a decade. And it means just the world to me because I feel like there have been people who have not only witnessed it, but who I think get it. Um, and that's important too. So I don't feel like totally isolated and like alien. But anyway, let this weekly live be one more iteration of all of it. And I want to just express my deep appreciation for anybody who muscles through this process with me. I hope that it's helpful for you and it is meaningful for you too, and that it can feed into your process as you do your work and you become who you are. So I'm going to end there. Thank you so much. If you want to support this or are curious about it, go to CoriWong.com, but check out the About page because that's where the archive is. And then if you really want to support it, you can go to the Love an Artist page, and there's lots of ways to support my work too. So see you next week after the finale of The Gadfly. We're talking about power. And yeah, we'll be gearing up for the actual finale of For the Love of Strangers in a couple of weeks too. And then, of course, look in the chat. Liberation is local. We'll have more pages soon. This doesn't end. Okay, have a good day. Bye.